The massive alien fleet appeared without warning at the edge of the solar system. Humanity's early detection systems barely registered the disturbance before thousands of vessels materialized, their hulking forms blotting out distant stars. Admiral Park stood rigidly in Earth Defense Command's Central Operations Room. His weathered face glowed blue from the holographic display showing the incoming threat. Around him, dozens of officers worked frantically at their stations, the room filled with urgent voices and the soft beeping of alert systems. "How many?" he asked, his voice calm despite the fear gripping his chest. Lieutenant Kim's fingers flew across her console, recalibrating sensors to get a better reading. She paused, rechecked her findings, and swallowed hard. "Over 5,000 vessels, sir. Nothing in our arsenal could even dent their fleet." Park closed his eyes briefly. Humanity had reached the stars, established outposts throughout the solar system, and even sent exploratory missions to nearby star systems. But their military technology remained limited, functional for peacekeeping among human settlements, woefully inadequate against whatever had just arrived. "Show me their approach vector," Park ordered. The hologram shifted to display the solar system. Red dots representing the alien fleet moved in perfect formation, bypassing Neptune and showing no signs of slowing. "They'll reach Saturn in 6 hours at current speed," Kim reported. "Earth in under 3 days." Park activated the emergency broadcast system. "This is not a drill. All Earth defense vessels mobilize immediately. Civilian evacuation protocols for outer colonies now in effect." Throughout the solar system, humanity's response began. Military ships rose from planetary bases on Mars and the Moon. Civilian transports changed course, fleeing from the outer settlements toward Earth. Space stations went into lockdown. The aliens maintained their perfect formation, ignoring the smaller human outposts they passed. Their target was clear: Earth itself. 12 hours later, the aliens sent their first communication. It appeared simultaneously on every screen, every phone, every communication device across human civilization. The message was simple and in perfect English. "We are the Voxuri Collective. Your resources belong to us. Your planet belongs to us. You have 2 Earth days to surrender all governmental authority and prepare for processing. Resistance will result in extinction." The message included detailed surrender protocols. In an emergency session of the United Earth Council, global leaders argued frantically. Some pushed for immediate surrender, hoping to negotiate better terms. Others demanded they fight to the last person. "Our entire fleet couldn't destroy even 1% of their ships before being obliterated," Defense Minister Han explained. "And their technology appears to be at least 2 centuries beyond ours." Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a research facility hidden under the Mariana Trench, Dr. Lee watched the alien message replay on her screen. Unlike the panic spreading throughout humanity, her expression showed intense focus. She had been waiting for this day, preparing for it without knowing exactly what form the threat would take. The facility around her hummed with energy. Project Whisper had been her life's work, exploring the strange anomalies in space-time that conventional physics couldn't explain. Her team had discovered something extraordinary. Space itself had properties that resembled dormant intelligence under very specific conditions. Lee turned to her assistant, Dr. Ba, who monitored the massive energy containment system that powered their experiments. "Is the prototype ready?" she asked. Ba nodded nervously. "Yes, but we've only tested it at 10% capacity. We don't know if the full system will remain stable. We don't have a choice anymore." Lee gestured to the screens showing the alien fleet. "That's extinction approaching. We need to try." She activated the secure communication channel to Earth Defense Command. Her clearance codes were among the highest in the scientific community, but even so, it took precious minutes to reach Admiral Park. "Admiral, this is Dr. Lee from Project Whisper." Park's tired face appeared on her screen. "Doctor, unless you've built us a miracle weapon, I don't have time." "That's exactly what I'm calling about," Lee interrupted. "I need to address the Defense Council immediately. I believe we have something that might save us all. Park studied her face carefully. Project Whisper was so classified that even he only knew it existed, not what it contained. You have 1 hour to get to command. I'll assemble everyone. Lee gathered her core team and the critical data. As they prepared to leave the underwater facility, she paused at the observation window overlooking their main experiment chamber. Inside, a sphere of contained energy pulsed gently. To the naked eye, it looked like nothing special, just a faintly glowing ball of light. But Lee knew better. It wasn't the energy itself that mattered. It was what the energy was doing to the space around it, waking something that had always been there, dormant and waiting. Are we really going to do this? Ba asked, standing beside her. Lee watched the pulsing light. We're going to ask space itself to help us fight back. As their transport rushed toward the surface, the alien fleet continued its methodical advance through the solar system. Unstoppable and unconcerned with humanity's defenses, they had conquered countless worlds before. Earth would be no different. Or so they thought. The Emergency Defense Council gathered in the underground war room beneath what had once been Geneva. 40 men and women, military leaders, scientists, and government representatives sat around a massive circular table. Their faces looked grim in the harsh lighting. Dr. Lee stood at the center of the room, her small team of scientists setting up equipment beside her. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. These people controlled Earth's remaining resources and military assets, and none of them looked hopeful. Admiral Park entered last, taking his seat at the head of the table. This meeting is now in session, he announced. We have less than 36 hours before the Voxery reach Earth. Dr. Lee claims to have a potential solution. Doctor, you have 15 minutes. Lee nodded and activated the holographic projector. The air above the center of the table filled with images of stars, galaxies, and mathematical equations. Project Spacefold isn't a weapon in the traditional sense, Dr. Lee began. It's a communication system. Admiral Park's laugh was harsh and bitter. We're facing extinction, and you want to talk to them. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Lee waited for them to quiet before continuing. Not to the Voxery, she clarified, adjusting the holographic display to show a strange, rippling pattern. To space itself. The murmurs turned to confused silence. For the past 25 years, my team has been studying anomalies in space-time, Lee continued. Moments where the laws of physics briefly changed. Ships passing through certain regions reported instrument failures. Probes detected areas where light bent without any mass to cause it. She changed the display to show a map of these anomalies throughout the solar system. At first, we thought these were random events. Then we noticed patterns. These anomalies respond to certain energy signatures. They avoid others. They learn. Defense Minister Jin leaned forward. Are you suggesting space is alive? Not exactly alive, Lee replied. But not simply empty either. Space has emergent properties. Given enough stimulus, regions can wake up and exhibit localized intelligence. The room erupted with voices. Some scoffed openly. Others demanded more explanation. A few simply stared in disbelief. Admiral Park slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Let her finish. Lee nodded gratefully. We've developed a system to stimulate these properties on command. We can essentially wake up regions of space and establish basic communication with them. And how does this help us against 5,000 alien warships? Asked General Sun, her voice heavy with skepticism. Because when space wakes up, it can selectively change how physics works within its boundaries, Lee explained, including whether ships can move through it at all. The scientific advisor to the council, Dr. Yun, shook his head. This violates every principle of physics we know. Not violates, Lee corrected. Transcends. The foundations of reality are more flexible than we understood. The skepticism in the room remained palpable. Lee glanced at her team and nodded. Dr. Ba stepped forward, carrying a clear cube about 30 centimeters wide. Rather than debate theory, let me show you, Lee said. She placed the cube on the table. Inside was what appeared to be empty space, though a faint shimmer suggested something unusual was happening within its boundaries. This is a small demonstration unit. We've been communicating with this region for months. Lee picked up a metal rod and slowly inserted it into the cube through a small opening. Everyone leaned forward to watch. As the rod entered the shimmering area, something impossible happened. The rod bent without breaking, curving around a central point as if the space itself refused to be penetrated. When Lee pulled the rod back out, it was perfectly straight again. The region inside reacts to intrusion by folding space around it, Lee explained. It's learned to recognize certain patterns and respond to them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You're saying we could make regions of space, refuse to let the alien ships pass? Admiral Park asked slowly. In theory, yes, Lee nodded. We've built larger generators that can create these effects throughout the solar system. But there's a catch. We've never deployed them at full scale. Once we wake these regions, we can't predict exactly how they'll behave, or if we can control them. And if they turn against us instead? Minister Jin asked. They've shown no hostility to us in testing, Lee replied. They seem curious about our signals, but not aggressive. The Voxari, on the other hand. The room's main screen flashed with an emergency alert. A young officer rushed in and whispered something to Admiral Park. His face darkened. The Voxari fleet has passed Jupiter's orbit, Park announced. They're accelerating. New estimated arrival. 24 hours. The council erupted into arguments again. Some demanded immediate surrender negotiations. Others insisted on a final military stand, however futile. Park raised his hand for silence. Dr. Lee, what exactly do you need to deploy this system? We need the energy reserves from all major Earth defense systems diverted to our generators, and we need to position deployment satellites at these coordinates. She displayed a map showing points throughout the inner solar system. That would leave Earth completely defenseless if your plan fails, General Sun pointed out. We're defenseless anyway, Park replied grimly. At least this gives us a chance. He stood up, looking at each council member in turn. We need to vote. Do we surrender to the Voxari, fight a conventional battle we cannot win, or try Dr. Lee's plan? The vote took less than 5 minutes. With extinction facing them, even the wildest chance seemed better than none. Deploy Project Spacefold, Park ordered, and pray that space itself is willing to help us. Lee's team rushed from the room to begin the largest scientific deployment in human history. As they hurried through the corridors, Dr. Ba caught up with Lee. You didn't tell them everything, he said quietly. Lee's face was grim. They don't need to know that the regions we've awakened have started communicating with each other, or that they're evolving faster than we predicted. You think they'll help us? I think, Lee said, that we're about to introduce the Voxari to something they've never encountered before, and I don't think they're going to like it. The orbital command center above Earth hummed with tension. Dr. Lee and her team monitored endless streams of data flowing from the deployment satellites. Each satellite housed a spacefold generator designed to wake up the dormant properties of the cosmos. The plan was desperate, untested at this scale, and humanity's last hope. All generators report ready, announced Dr. Ba, his fingers dancing across the control panel. Energy reserves at maximum capacity. Dr. Lee took a deep breath and looked around at her team. They had worked for years on this project, never truly knowing if it would be needed. Now, with the Voxari fleet approaching Mars, the moment had come. Begin the activation sequence, she ordered. Bai pressed his palm against the authorization scanner. Activation sequence initiated. Primary wave deploying in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Throughout the solar system, 27 deployment satellites activated simultaneously. They released precisely calibrated energy pulses into the fabric of space. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sensors began to register changes. Energy dispersion patterns are unusual, reported Dr. Choi. studying the incoming data. It's not spreading evenly. It's concentrating in clusters. Lee leaned forward. That's what we want. Those are the regions with the highest potential for awakening. On the main view screen, they watched as the space between Earth and Mars began to behave strangely. Light bent in impossible ways as the fundamental properties of reality shifted. Stars seemed to move, not because they actually changed position, but because the space through which their light traveled was altering. Secondary wave deploying now, Bai announced. This time, the changes were immediately visible. Between Earth and Mars, patches of space took on a visible shimmer, like heat rising from hot pavement. Radio signals passing through these regions returned distorted, no longer following the expected patterns of transmission. "Look at this," whispered Dr. Choi, pointing to her screen. The returning signals organized themselves into complex mathematical sequences. "It's communicating with us." The patterns grew more organized with each passing minute. Simple responses at first, echoes of the signals sent by the human team. Then variations, then entirely new patterns. "They're learning," Lee said, her voice filled with wonder. "Send the recognition sequence." The team transmitted a carefully designed pattern of energy pulses, the same sequences they had used with their small test regions. The response came back immediately, far more complex than anything they had seen in their laboratory tests. "The regions are communicating with each other," Bay realized. "They're forming networks." In the main command center, Admiral Park and the Defense Council watched the feed from Lee's team. The awakened regions appeared as glowing clouds on their tactical display, spreading throughout the inner solar system. "Will this actually stop their ships?" Park asked through the comlink. "We're about to find out," Lee replied. "The Voxeri Vanguard is approaching the first awakened region now." Everyone fell silent as they watched the tactical display. The Voxeri advance fleet, 50 massive warships, approached the edge of an awakened region near Mars. The alien vessels showed no sign of slowing. They clearly hadn't detected anything unusual ahead of them. The lead ship entered the shimmering boundary and stopped. Not slowed, not damaged, simply stopped moving, as if it had hit a wall of solid steel. The ships behind it scattered to avoid collision, their formation breaking for the first time since they had entered the solar system. "It worked," breathed Admiral Park. On the command bridge of the lead Voxeri vessel, Commander Rock stared in disbelief at the sensor readings. Their engines were operating at full power, yet they weren't moving forward even a centimeter. The space around them had become selectively impermeable to their ships. "Impossible," he raged, his scaled skin flushing with anger. "Increase power to maximum." The massive engines of the Voxeri warship flared brighter, drawing enough energy to power a small sun. The ship shuddered with the strain, but didn't move forward. "Sir, the engines can't sustain this output," warned his second-in-command. Rock slammed his fist against the control panel. "Target the human energy arrays. Destroy them all." The Voxeri weapon systems, capable of cracking planets, powered up. Energy beams lashed out toward the nearest human deployment satellite, only to curve harmlessly away before reaching their target, as if the beams were physical objects being deflected by an invisible shield. Rock ordered torpedo launches next. The advanced warheads shot forward, then stopped in mid-trajectory, hanging motionless in space like frozen insects. Back in the orbital command center, Lee and her team watched in amazement. "The awakened regions are protecting our satellites," Ba said incredulously. "Not protecting," Lee corrected. "They simply won't allow anything to harm the sources of the signals they're communicating with." Dr. Choi pointed to new data appearing on their screens. "The regions are expanding, growing faster than our models predicted." Indeed, the awakened patches of space were spreading, connecting with each other, forming larger networks. As they watched, a Voxeri scout ship tried to maneuver around the edge of an awakened region, only to find that the region had expanded to block its path. "It's like space itself has decided to quarantine them," Admiral Park observed from the main command center. Throughout the solar system, the same scene repeated. Voxery ships found themselves unable to advance, their weapons useless, their superior technology rendered meaningless by the simple fact that space itself refused to cooperate with them. The main Voxery fleet halted its advance, holding position just beyond Jupiter's orbit, their communication channels filled with confused and angry exchanges. In the midst of this triumph, Dr. Lee's expression remained concerned as she studied the incoming data. "What's wrong?" Admiral Park asked, noticing her expression over the video link. "The awakened regions aren't just following our programming," she explained. "They're evolving their own behaviors. Look at these communication patterns. They are talking to each other in ways we never anticipated." "Is that dangerous?" Park asked. "I don't know," Lee admitted. "We've woken something ancient, something that's been dormant since the universe began. And I'm not sure we fully understand what it's capable of." As if to emphasize her point, a new pattern appeared on their screens, a communication signal from the awakened regions that matched no sequence they had sent. Space itself was reaching out, trying to tell them something. And behind the trapped Voxery fleet, more awakened regions began to appear, ones the humans hadn't created. As if space, once awakened, was spreading the condition on its own. Dr. Lee rubbed her tired eyes as she monitored the expanding awakened regions. It had been 36 hours since Project Spacefold's activation. The Voxery fleet remained trapped, unable to advance toward Earth yet unwilling to retreat. A stalemate, but one that couldn't last forever. "They're regrouping," Admiral Park noted, joining Lee at the main observation deck. Below them, Earth shone blue and peaceful, unaware of the cosmic struggle happening beyond the atmosphere. The tactical display showed the Voxery ships forming new patterns. Smaller vessels gathered around larger ones in tight formations. "What are they doing?" Park asked. Before Lee could answer, alarms blared across every monitoring station. On the screens, energy readings from the Voxery fleet spiked to unprecedented levels. "They're charging something big," Dr. Bay reported, his fingers racing across the control panel. "Nothing like we've seen before." The largest Voxery vessel at the center of their formation began to glow with strange purple light. The energy signature didn't match any weapon humans had encountered. "Analysis," Lee demanded. Dr. Choi looked up from her readings, face pale. "It's targeting the fabric of space-time itself. They're trying to tear through the awakened regions." "They can do that?" Park asked incredulously. "They're using space-time disruptors." Dr. Lee shouted as the readings became clearer. Weapons designed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The purple glow intensified. Then, like lightning striking in slow motion, energy beams shot out from the Voxery ships. Where they hit the awakened regions, space itself seemed to rip, creating jagged tears in reality. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Had the Voxery found a way to defeat their only defense? The response came without warning. The awakened regions didn't just repair themselves, they attacked. Throughout the solar system, space folded around Voxery vessels. Ships disappeared into pockets of distorted reality, only to reappear moments later twisted into impossible shapes. Metal hulls bent at angles that shouldn't exist, as if some cosmic hand had crumpled them like paper. "What's happening to them?" Admiral Park whispered, watching the display in amazement. "The awakened regions are defending themselves," Lee explained. "When the Voxery tried to damage them, they responded." On the screens, more Voxery ships vanished into rippling distortions. Some emerged mangled beyond recognition. Others didn't return at all. "It's like space itself has declared war on them," Park said, awe in his voice. The remaining Voxery vessels tried to retreat, engines flaring desperately. But the awakened regions pursued them, expanding far beyond the boundaries that humans had created. New regions spontaneously awakened where there had been none before. "This isn't right," Lee muttered, studying the readings with growing concern. "The awakened regions shouldn't be able to expand on their own." Dr. Bod brought up a system-wide map. "They're growing exponentially. At this rate, The entire inner solar system will be awakened within days. Can we shut down the generators? Park asked. Turn them off. Lee shook her head. We designed the system to initiate awakening. We never considered we might need to reverse it. The process is self-sustaining now. As they watched, a large Voxeri cruiser fired another space-time disruptor. This time, the awakened region seemed to contract around the energy beam, absorbing it entirely. Then, like a striking snake, the region expanded outward at impossible speed, engulfing the cruiser. The ship didn't reappear. We've created something we can't control, Lee admitted, her voice tight with worry. These regions are evolving faster than we anticipated. They're developing new behaviors on their own. The tactical display showed the remaining Voxeri fleet in disarray. Of the 5,000 ships that had entered the solar system, barely 200 remained. The others had been crushed, twisted, or simply disappeared into the awakened regions. At least they can't hurt us now, Park suggested. Maybe, Lee replied. But what happens when the awakened regions run out of Voxeri ships? What will they do then? We don't know what motivates them, or what they consider a threat. As if in answer to her fears, an alert sounded from the communications station. We're receiving a transmission, the communications officer reported, sounding surprised. From a Voxeri vessel. Put it through, Park ordered. The screen flickered, then showed the interior of a Voxeri command center. Unlike the sleek, confident aliens they had seen in the ultimatum message, these Voxeri looked ragged. Their scaled skin had lost its luster, and their eyes held fear. This is Lead Commander Toll of the Voxeri Collective, the alien said in halting human language. We request immediate cessation of hostilities and emergency diplomatic channels. Park exchanged a glance with Lee before responding. This is Admiral Park of Earth Defense Command. Your fleet invaded our system and threatened extinction. Why should we negotiate now? The Voxeri commander's face twisted in what might have been desperation. Because we've seen this before, he explained. The awakened space, we call it the Devouring. It destroyed our home system centuries ago. That's why we've been searching for new worlds. Silence fell across the command center as humans processed this revelation. You've encountered awakened regions before? Dr. Lee asked, stepping into view of the transmission. Yes, the commander replied. Our ancestors tried to harness the power of folded space for faster travel. They woke something that could not be controlled. It consumed our homeworlds, one by one. We've been running ever since. And you've been conquering other worlds to replace what you lost, Park surmised. The Voxeri made a gesture of acknowledgement. We need to work together now. You don't understand what you've unleashed. It won't stop with us. Dr. Lee's monitoring station beeped urgently. A new set of readings appeared on her screen. The awakened regions are expanding toward Earth now, she announced, her voice tight. And they're showing the same patterns they did before attacking the Voxeri ships. Park looked from the screen showing the desperate aliens to the display showing the approaching awakened regions. It seems we have a common problem, he said finally. We'll establish diplomatic channels. But know this, any trick, any aggression, and we'll let space itself finish what it started with your fleet. The Voxeri commander nodded. There are no tricks left to play. Only survival, if we're lucky. As the transmission ended, Dr. Lee turned to her team. We need to understand these awakened regions better, and fast. They were our saviors an hour ago. They might be our destroyers now. Outside the station, the awakened regions of space continued to expand, glimmering with strange energies as reality itself rebelled against those who had dared to manipulate it. The neutral meeting point was a small space station positioned carefully between Earth and Mars. Humans had built it years earlier as a research outpost, but now it served a more important purpose. Inside the main conference room, representatives from two species sat across from each other, eyeing one another warily. Dr. Lee led the human delegation. Across the table sat Ambassador Tool of the Voxeri Collective. His once bright scales had dulled, and the proud bearing of his species was diminished by recent events. Outside the station's windows, the awakened regions of space shimmered like oil on water. They had formed a complex network throughout the solar system. Strange corridors of normal space ran between them, safe passages that human ships could travel through freely. But any Voxeri vessel that tried to move aggressively found itself immediately trapped or disabled. For 3 weeks, we've been studying the communication patterns, Dr. Lee explained, displaying the data on the holographic projector between them. The awakened regions respond differently to our signals than to yours. They hate us, Toll said simply. As they should. Not hate, Lee corrected. They don't experience emotions as we understand them. But they remember. Your weapons hurt them. Toll's inner eyelids blinked slowly. We hunted and consumed worlds because we believed it was the only way to survive, he explained. We never understood what happened to our home. He activated his own data projector, showing images of a distant star system. Beautiful planets circled a red sun. Then the images changed, showing the same system torn apart, planets broken, space itself seeming to bend and warp. 200 years ago, our scientists discovered what you call awakened regions. They tried to use them for faster space travel, Toll continued. When the regions responded negatively, our leaders ordered weapons to be used against them. Just like you tried here, Admiral Park noted from his seat beside Lee. Toole lowered his head. We repeat our mistakes. The awakened regions destroy our home system. Only our fastest ships escaped. We've been conquering worlds ever since, always running from the memory of what happened. Dr. Ba, who had been analyzing Voxeri data, looked up suddenly. Their weapons didn't cause the regions to awaken initially, he said to Lee. Their communication method did. What does he mean? Toole asked. Lee studied the Voxeri data more carefully. Your scientists used energy patterns that were too aggressive, like shouting at someone sleeping. We used gradual, rhythmic patterns, like gently waking someone with music. How could you know this when we did not? Another Voxeri asked. Because humans didn't try to control the regions, Dr. Choi explained. We tried to communicate with them. Your approach treated space as something to be conquered. Ours treated it as something to be understood. For 3 days, the delegations worked together. They combined human communication protocols with Voxeri knowledge of the awakened region's capabilities. Together, they developed new ways to interact with the spatial intelligences. On the 4th day, they tested their new approach. From the observation deck, human and Voxeri scientists watched as specially designed signal emitters sent complex mathematical patterns into an awakened region. The response was immediate. The region shifted color, pulsing in patterns that matched their signals but added new variations. It was the most complex response yet. They're learning our combined language, Lee said excitedly. And they're teaching us theirs. More patterns emerge, beautiful in their mathematical precision. Dr. Choi translated the incoming data. They're showing us how they perceive reality, she announced. They've always been here, Dr. Lee realized, studying the patterns. Dormant until civilizations advanced enough to perceive them. The next signal from the awakened region contained something unexpected, coordinates pointing to star systems beyond human exploration. There are more of them out there, Admiral Park said. Many more. Tull studied the data with new interest. Not enemies to flee from, but a network we could communicate with. In the weeks that followed, a fragile peace took shape. The remaining Voxeri ships stayed in the outer solar system, carefully monitored. The awakened regions stopped expanding once they realized no further threats were coming. Slowly, they created more safe passages, allowing limited movement throughout the system. Human scientists discovered that the awakened regions responded most positively to their signals. The Voxeri, despite their advanced technology, couldn't establish the same level of communication. Your species has an intuitive understanding of space that we lack, Toole admitted during one meeting. Perhaps because you evolved on a single world, while our ancestors migrated between planets even before developing advanced technology. 3 months after the Voxuri arrival, something remarkable happened. An awakened region near Jupiter began transmitting signals to both human and Voxuri receivers. The patterns translated into a form of navigation chart, showing safe pathways not just through the solar system, but beyond it. They're offering to help us travel, Lee explained to the Earth Defense Council, without the need for the destructive drives the Voxuri use. Humanity found itself in an unexpected position. Mediators between the Voxuri and the space intelligences, Earth's unique approach to physics had given humans a special role in the galactic community, not through superior firepower or technology, but through understanding that reality itself could be an ally. As the first joint human-Voxuri expedition prepared to make contact with other awakened regions in distant star systems, Admiral Park stood beside Dr. Lee on the observation deck of the new flagship. The ship utilized a revolutionary drive system, one that didn't force its way through space, but asked permission to pass. The awakened regions themselves helped guide it, creating temporary corridors of accelerated travel. "You know what's ironic?" Park said, watching the swirling patterns of altered space that now protected Earth better than any fleet could. "We spent centuries looking for intelligent life among the stars." Dr. Lee smiled, watching the space ahead of them ripple with welcome. "When all along we were living inside it." The ship slipped gently into the embracing folds of awakened space, carried forward by the cosmic intelligence that had once been their savior, then their threat, and now their most unexpected ally. Earth grew smaller behind them, but they weren't leaving home. In a very real sense, they were finally getting to know it.